So this video is going to talk a lot about sex and the objectification of women in anime, so if you're a kiddo or you otherwise don't feel comfortable with that discussion, maybe go find a different video to watch this time. You can come back to a different one. Fan service in anime. Love it or hate it, it's pretty much impossible to avoid in any modern show. Technically, fan service is an umbrella term that covers anything included in a show purely to cater to the fans. But in practice, fan service really only means one thing. And look, everyone who's been in the anime space long enough can think of dozens of examples of fan service done badly. The kind that can take even well-developed female characters and turn them into just objects in a few frames. The kind that we all know doesn't add anything to the universe and is just there for fan service's sake. And it's not exactly a hot take to think that this sort of stuff is uninteresting to watch, or even offensive, especially as a woman when, let's face it, we're pretty aware that in most of the anime space, we're not the target audience. Now, after saying all of that, I'm gonna make a kind of outrageous claim here. Fan service can be done tastefully sometimes. Because the sexuality itself isn't the problem here, it's the way that the sexuality is framed. It's the lack of agency on characters' parts, and it's usually that the subject of that sexualization either doesn't consent to that viewing, or is a minor and shouldn't be shown that way at all. Out of every show I've watched in recent memory, there's only one that I can think of that not only performs fan service well, but even swings the opposite way into empowerment from that sexuality. Kakegurui is a Netflix anime about Yumiko Jabami, a transfer student at Hyakao Private Academy, which is a school for rich and powerful teens that runs on a cutthroat gambling system. Status is determined by the student's gambling ability, with the best of the best rising to the coveted student council, and the worst relegated to the indentured servant house pet status. Yumiko, a transfer student and gambling genius, enters the school and throws the entire system on its head. If that sounds like an interesting show to you and you haven't seen it yet, please go ahead and watch it on your own. It's really good, and this video will still be here when you get back. If you're still working your way through the series, we're only covering Season 1 today, so no need to worry about Season 2 or Twin. Now, I'm sure there's a ton of you sitting out there that have seen this show already and are thinking, girly, this is the horniest show ever, what are you talking about? And yeah, there's a good chance that I'm an anime fan that's so broken down by the constant weight of sexism in this medium that I love so much that I might be grasping at straws to try and force this type of fan service to conform to my rigid ideas of queer-friendly Western feminism. But also, I just really love the crazy gambler ladies and I want to talk about them, okay? Let me have this. Okay, so oh, shoot, wait a sec. Okay, let's get started. A good starting point when talking about fan service is the concept of the male gaze. You've probably heard that term thrown around in other film criticism, but in short, it's a theory by Laura Mulvey about the ways that women are visually presented in film that reduce them into sexual objects for the heterosexual male viewer, and subsequently, this view robs these characters of full personhood. So when we say the male gaze, there's really 3 different gazes to look at, which we'll break down one by one. First is how the camera views the woman. In anime, this is the very deliberate fan service on the artist's part, based on the technical direction of the show itself. This includes your unnecessary butt shots, your slow pan up the woman's body, shots from above that show off the woman's boobs, etc. This is the part of the gaze that shows how the creator views the woman. This mostly gets translated within the camera shots and design in ways that don't typically affect the world of the story and only gratify past the fourth wall, meaning to the audience. But this also includes any plot-justified fan service. That includes things like characters who wear skimpy outfits for lore reasons. And your, wow, this girl is just so clumsy and trips into groping situations all the time type of characters. Second is how the male characters view the woman in universe. This includes, your thirsty teenage boys trying to peek at the girls in the baths, your skeevy older men, guys constantly talking about flat chests, stuff like that. And you can tell that someone behind the scenes kind of thinks that this is skeevy because this sort of behavior is often lampshaded by having other characters condemn the perv, like other boys watching disappointedly as they try to sneak into the girls' side of the baths, or girls beating up the perv once they're caught. However, it's almost never punished in universe by the other characters. They just accept that the pervy guy will continue to perv. That is his way. There's also an interesting subsection to this with girls who are jealous of the girl with bigger boobs. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but in most cases in real life, it's the other way around, and it feels a lot like a man trying to put words into these girls' mouths to try and get away with talking about the boobs. It's very much an extension of male objectification, but kind of disguised through a female character. The last part of the male gaze is how the male spectator views these girls, meaning the audience themselves. And with anime, it's often very literal objectification. We've got sexy bunny figurines, body pillows with shy and blushing girls, the weird harassment of female cosplayers in ways that male cosplayers aren't. And honestly, I can't even really blame guys when from the ground up, these characters are literally designed for that express purpose. Except for the cosplayer harassment thing, don't harass people. In general, just don't. On the other hand, every guy I've ever talked to about this swears up and down that fan service is gross and I'm totally not into it. Which, like, fellas, maybe you're serious, or maybe you know that it's not a good look to admit that fan service works on you, but if it's not even appealing to straight guys, what are we even doing here? Point being, it's the culmination of these three gazes that make anime a space unfriendly towards female characters and female viewers. Female characters are almost always sex objects first, and female audiences are second-class citizens in most of this space. This is well-known knowledge once you've been here long enough. Even in shoujo and josei, the shows that target women, these gazes can take a strange priority. Throw in the cherry on top of a community that is way too tolerant of young characters getting this treatment, it's no wonder that this amazing art form has regularly been relegated to being cringe and weird. Obviously, the onus falls initially on creators that encourage harmful portrayals of women and children to make a quick buck, but the truth of the matter is that this problem wouldn't exist if us as consumers weren't so quick to hand that buck over. And now, if you've seen the show, you're probably thinking, but doesn't Kakegurui still have all of that? And yes, but actually, I think it's a lot more accurate to say that this show isn't working through the male gaze, it's working through the female gaze. And before we start breaking down why, I want to have two massive disclaimers here, mostly about stuff I've already talked about. First, while I acknowledge that all of the characters are technically teenagers, and again, it's not okay to sexualize minors, the text treats them functionally as adults. And yes, I know that's something that a lot of anime does, but hear me out. The fact that these characters are in a private high school is incidental at best. It could be swapped out as a university and nothing would change. All of them look like adults, just in school uniforms. Except for Runa, but she never gets the same horny treatment as the other girls anyway. Like, okay, look at Yumiko versus Hanuka from Love Live. These two are supposed to be the same age, 16. But Yumiko is clearly made to look more adult-like, while Hanuka is more childlike. Also, every character in Kakegurui has functional adult autonomy. Yes, a few characters reference their parents, but in reality, they spend money how they wish, several run large businesses or business-like operations, and generally, they're just completely on their own. They aren't doing things that normal high schoolers would be doing, and you can contrast this with a show like My Hero Academia, where it's a huge plot point that these characters are kids and must be protected as much as possible by the adults responsible for them. The kids in My Hero Academia behave specifically like teenagers, with the show placing a huge emphasis on school events and other facets of teenage life. That doesn't happen in Kakegurui. There are no adults in Hyakao taking care of these characters, or even mentioned except for one teacher at the beginning that introduces Yumiko. I don't think these characters even go to class, let alone, worry about their grade in math, or go shopping with their friends on the weekend, or, maybe get grounded by their parents for wasting thousands of dollars every day. In the world of Hyakao, these characters have every right that adults have in terms of autonomy and decision-making. There is nothing childlike about them. So with all of that laid out, because we're talking about sexualization, we're not going to look at the negative consequences of sexualizing minors in this discussion. Cool? Cool. Second is that I'm going to take a death of the author approach. While I'm sure that Yasuko Kobayashi, who was the head writer of the show, is the source of a lot of what I love about this adaptation, I don't really want to get into the nuance of a male mangaka and male directors and the nuances of men writing women, blah, blah, blah. I just want the show to speak for itself. Okay, cool. Let's get back to actually talking about the text now instead of all these disclaimers. So how, on a technical level, does Kakegurui use the female gaze when it comes to its fan service? The female gaze in general is a little more difficult to pinpoint than the male gaze, but its main core is about the agency of its female characters. Through the collaboration of the camera, the characters, and the audience, the women in a piece of media aren't segmented for consumption like they are through the male gaze. They're given the full agency and respect that they deserve as people, not just as objects to be ogled. Again, the definition's pretty nebulous, but Kakegurui definitely hits the mark. It loves women. So much. And despite what it may look like at first glance, it's not in an objectifying way. This is a show about powerful women dominating every room they walk into. Not in a girl boss way or a I'm tough like a guy way. These women are smart, refined, resourceful, batshit crazy, and yes, even alluring. And that's not in spite of anything. Their womanhood is never specifically something that helps or hurts them within the plot, which is a trap that a lot of feminist media has been falling into nowadays. And when I say that, don't get me wrong, I love a good, woman kicks ass and takes names and rises to the top while crushing the patriarchy kind of thing. But you know how everybody lost their minds when Schitt's Creek came out because it was a show where homophobia just didn't exist? Kakegurui is refreshing because the patriarchy just doesn't exist. Heck, I don't even think it passes the reverse Bechdel test. For contrast, let's look at the 3 named male characters in season 1. There's Ryota, who's just the audience surrogate. His entire character is to help explain the gambles to the audience and endear us more to Yumiko. Then we meet June, who is this meathead bully who's set up as this domineering guy that takes what he wants by force and he's really gross, but is ultimately swindled into being a house pet by Mary and Yumiko. Then there's Kaede, the student council treasurer obsessed with logic that loses to Yumiko's chaotic love of risk. Kaede is the only one here that I'd call a fleshed out character. And sure, he's a smug ass, but he doesn't use gender or male power as a weapon. He'd be the same character as a woman. Beyond Ryota's 5 seconds of fame at the end, Kaede is the only male presence with any real impact on the plot. Honestly, this show veers so far away from the male gaze that it just straight up crashes into Sapphic. The opening credits, which are excellent, by the way, are a host of women, and Ryota, lined up at a table for Yumiko's, and each other's, consumption. Yumiko and Mary, so gay. Yumiko and Kurari, so gay. Sayaka and Kurari, the gayest. Heck, if Yumiko coming at herself with a knife and fork isn't a metaphor for self-love, I don't know what is. And there's no shame in any of this. It's even more astonishing that the show can thread the needle into not fetishizing these sapphic situations and just reducing them into something that's just hot for men. It's no secret that Yumiko is a sexual character. The thrill of gambling is a huge turn-on for her, and that's a huge stylistic point of the show. It's summed up really well in her catchphrase, "Let's get our gambling freak on." To her, gambling might as well be as intimate as sex, with the give and take of 2 or more partners that reveal more and more of themselves until the final card is dealt with this explosion of victory or defeat. And again, the visual depiction is not afraid to lean into this. The camera constantly zooms in on Yumiko with her face flushed and her mouth watering, where she's obviously enjoying herself. And this is a little bit of a side note, but even though Yumiko loves to flirt when it helps her achieve her goals, I honestly read her as ace outside of, the gambling situation, but that might just be me. Let me know in the comments what you thought. But the difference here with Yumiko being shown in a sexual moment versus how she may have been used in another show is that Yumiko is fully in control of that depiction. There's a metatextual consent between Yumiko and the camera. Nothing about Yumiko's behavior is for the benefit of the audience. She's simply having a sexual experience that the audience and those around her are privy to, and that she allows them to be privy to. She loves the risk of gambling. But more importantly, she wants those that she gambles with to enjoy it as much as she does. If we continue with our gambling as sex analogy, then this can be read as her placing equal value on the enjoyment of all parties, including her opponent, and the viewer. The show even goes so far as to condemn those that try to participate in that dynamic without her consent, or in ways that she doesn't agree with. Midari, who's a character that also enjoys the risk of gambling, though more so the risk of physical pain, rigs a match to intentionally lose so that Yumiko would shoot her. Yes, this is condoned by the school. Yes, this show is wild. That's not the point. Yumiko figures this out and instantly despises Midori for hogging all of the fun.
Gambling is only fun because there's a chance both sides might feel pain.
Or on the other side, pleasure. Yumiko explicitly doesn't like the idea of one side hogging all of the fun, where she may be a source of pleasure, but not allowed to enjoy it on her own terms. Well, gee, I don't know, there might be a metaphor there, huh? There's often a wrinkle when we talk about sexualizing women in media. At least in America, there's this virgin-slut dichotomy, where if you aren't just prudish and reserved, you're wild and hoary. It's not a bad thing for women to be shown in sexual situations. It's bad when they aren't enjoying themselves. Anime specifically has a really bad relationship with the enjoyment thing, because often when a woman is shown in a sexual situation, it's not of her own volition. Her clothes will fall off through some random act of God, so she covers up and she screams when she's ogled at, or she blushes with embarrassment when she realizes she was accidentally flashing someone after she tripped and fell. She's not enjoying herself. She's an object and doesn't want to be. And the women who do enjoy flaunting their sexuality are either just a one-dimensional joke, just basically a pair of walking tits, or if they do get a character arc, it's often about reforming them into a less slutty version of themselves to be more acceptable for the man pursuing them. And it's such a breath of fresh air that doesn't happen in Kakegurui. No one has to be reformed from who they are because this world accepts these characters as is, whether they're more buttoned up or more bold. No one is condemned for enjoying themselves, and no one is changed to be more acceptable to society or the male gaze. Women are allowed to be lovely and beautiful one moment and then twisted and ugly in the blink of an eye. They can be innocent and demure one moment and then raging the next. Of course, the show isn't perfect. It has its flaws. Personally, I can't justify all of the under-the-skirt shots as anything but the male gaze unless a character is consensually lifting their skirt, and boy howdy, is the show just chock full of them. Another is that while I do believe Yumiko truly does care about equal experiences, she does coerce a lot of people into participating to her, shall we say, very intense level. Never mind the fact that in the end they usually win in some other way, it's still not cool to try and bully people into participating in ways that they're not comfortable with. She's also just really handsy with Mary in a creepy, gropey way that I don't love. That's like the one sapphic flaw I can see there because Mary's just obviously not into it. Not gonna sit here and try to justify it, just want to acknowledge the weak points. I also want to acknowledge that despite all of the praise I've been heaping on this show, it's certainly a piece of art that has to exist within the overall context of anime culture. All of my arguments for its strength had to be couched in many minutes in how it's an exception to the rule, and then taken out of context of the culture it was built in. But with that said, it's the rare piece of anime where the women are genuinely enjoying themselves, and not for the sake of a boy or for the sake of the men in the audience, but purely for themselves. Let's look at the end credits for a final example of what I'm talking about. It's Yumiko, walking to the beat of the music in the rain with frequent under-the-skirt shots of her underwear and close-ups of her boobs. This sets the typical expectation of the camera's male gaze dividing her up into consumable pieces, right? However, the dynamic shifts when she eventually sheds her coat and unbuttons her shirt enough so that her bra is visible as she confidently strides towards the camera. She's decided to shed her clothes of her own volition, and the full body shot of the camera reads as, "Look at me in all of my glory." There's a lot of power in her stride and her demeanor as she smiles at the audience, and while this could be read as a performance for that audience, I prefer to look at it as an invitation to the audience to join in on the fun and her turning the tables on the camera itself. The camera is no longer in charge of how she's being shown. She is. As the song says, if we step into the depths and remove all troubles, that insanely desired moment will be waiting for us. Let's feel each other in the depths of hell, deprecating and deceiving, exposing, demanding, and going crazy. In other words, she wants us to join her. That is just so typically me, oh baby, oh, oops, I did it again. that I'm sent from above. I'm not that innocent.